I own everything now. My husband's voice echoed through the dining room. Not loud. Not angry. Almost worse. Calm. Cold. Certain. I own everything now. And honestly. He leaned back in his chair and looked directly at me. I can't live with a black woman no more. The room went silent. The fork slipped from my fingers and hit the plate. Clink. A tiny sound. But somehow it felt louder than thunder. His mother stopped chewing. His sister looked down into her wine glass. Nobody gasped. Nobody defended me. Nobody said, "Derek, what the hell is wrong with you?" Because deep down, they had all been waiting for this moment. And in that second I realized something terrifying. I wasn't shocked by what he said. I was shocked that he finally said it out loud. I just sat there, quiet, still, looking at the man I'd spent 19 years loving. 19 years. 19 birthdays. 19 Christmas mornings. 19 years of sacrifices nobody ever noticed. And somehow, none of it mattered anymore. Derek smirked. Not a big smile. Just enough to let me know he thought he'd already won. That was the thing about people who suddenly got money. They stopped seeing people. They only saw status. And Derek had become obsessed with status. Obsessed. But the worst part? The money wasn't even really his. Not the way he thought. Not the way everyone else thought. Not the way the judge would eventually explain. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Because to understand what happened in that dining room, you have to understand how a man can slowly transform into a stranger while sleeping beside you every night. And trust me, that transformation didn't happen overnight. It started 3 years earlier, right after Derek got promoted. First, I was proud of him. God, I was proud. Nobody saw how hard he worked. The long hours, the constant pressure, the anxiety attacks he hid from everyone. Everyone saw the success. I saw the struggle. That's what wives do. At least that's what I believed back then. I remembered nights when we'd split a fast food meal because money was tight. Nights when our electricity almost got shut off. Nights when we sat on the floor because we couldn't afford furniture. Back then, Derek used to hold my hand and say something I never forgot. One day we're gonna make it. We. Not me. We. Funny how one word can tell you everything about a person. And funny how quickly that word can disappear. The promotion changed everything. Suddenly Derek was making more money than anyone in his family had ever made. Suddenly there were luxury watches, expensive suits, country club memberships, networking parties, people who laughed too hard at his jokes, people who treated him like royalty. And little by little, he started believing them. At first the changes were small, tiny, easy to excuse. A comment here, strange look there, a little less appreciation. A little more arrogance. Then one night we attended a company event. I remember it clearly, because it was the first time I felt embarrassed standing next to my own husband. Not because of me, because of him. A woman approached us. Tall, elegant, perfect smile. The type of woman who practiced looking effortless. She introduced herself. Derek immediately straightened his posture. His voice changed. His laugh changed. Everything changed. The woman asked how long we'd been married. 19 years, I said. Before she could respond, Derek laughed. Yeah, we've come a long way. Something about the way he said it made my stomach tighten. Then the woman smiled at me. What do you do? Before I could answer, Derek answered for me. Oh, Angela just volunteers and handles things at home. Just. The word landed like a slap. Just. I smiled politely, but inside, something cracked. Because Derek knew exactly what I'd sacrificed. He knew I'd put my own career on hold when his father got sick. He knew I'd managed every household emergency, every financial crisis, every family problem, every move, every setback. He knew. But in that room, he reduced my entire life to one word. Just. And somehow it got worse. On the drive home, I asked him about it. Not angrily. Just honestly. Why did you say it like that? The irritation on his face appeared immediately. Say what? Just volunteers. Derek sighed dramatically. The way people do when they think you're beneath the conversation. Angela, not everything is an attack. There it was. The first weapon. Dismissal. A manipulator's favorite tool. Make you question what you clearly heard. Make you doubt your instincts. Make you feel unreasonable. I stared out the window. The city lights blurred past. And for the first time, I wondered if success was changing him, or simply revealing him. That question haunted me, because once you see a crack in a person's mask, you start noticing others. And I noticed plenty, especially when his new friends entered the picture. People who talked endlessly about money. 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 Everything was money. What car you drove. What neighborhood you lived in. What clothes you wore. Who you knew. Who you married. One evening we attended a dinner party at a mansion that looked more like a museum. The women discussed luxury vacations, designer handbags, private schools, vacation homes. I listened politely. Then one woman turned to me. "What investment properties do you own?" Before I could answer, another woman laughed. "Oh honey, she's Derek's wife." The table erupted with quiet chuckles. Not loud enough to sound cruel, just loud enough to sting. And what hurt most wasn't them. It was Derek. Does he laugh too? Not much. Just enough. Just enough. That became a pattern. Always just enough. Just enough disrespect to wound. Just enough deniability to avoid accountability. Just enough cruelty to keep me questioning myself. Months passed. Then years. And the man who once called me his partner started acting like I was an accessory. Something that belonged beside him. Not with him. Beside him. There is a difference. A painful difference. The worst part? I stayed. Not because I was weak. People always misunderstand that. Staying isn't always weakness. Sometimes staying is hope. Sometimes staying is loyalty. Sometimes staying is believing the person you loved is still somewhere inside the person hurting you. I kept waiting for that man to come back. But he never did. Instead, someone else arrived. A version of Derek I barely recognized. A version obsessed with appearances. A version who constantly talked about levels. People on your level. People beneath your level. People above your level. Levels. As if human beings were floors in a building. One night he said something that chilled me. We were watching television. A successful black couple appeared on screen. The husband was praising his wife. Talking about partnership. Talking about teamwork. Talking about gratitude. Derek rolled his eyes. Then he muttered something under his breath. Something he thought I wouldn't hear. That's why some people never reach the top. I looked at him. What does that mean? He shrugged. But his smile lingered. And that smile told me more than his words ever could. Because for the first time, I saw contempt. Not frustration. Not stress. Contempt. And once contempt enters a marriage, something dangerous begins. Something slow. Something poisonous. Something that rarely heals on its own. Still, I wasn't prepared for what happened 6 months later. Nobody could have prepared me. Not my friends. Not my pastor. Not my sister. Not even the lawyer whose business card would eventually sit inside my purse. Because 6 months later, I accidentally opened an email that wasn't meant for me. And what I read changed everything. Not because it exposed another woman. It was worse than that. Much worse. Because the email revealed what Derek really thought about me. What he'd been saying behind my back. What he'd been planning. And by the time I finished reading it, my hands were shaking. Not from heartbreak. From realization. The man sitting across from me every night was preparing for a war. And he thought I had absolutely no idea. What he didn't know was that I had already seen the first move. And once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. I wish I could tell you I found the email by snooping. It would make the story cleaner. Simpler. But the truth is far more disturbing. I found it because Derek had stopped seeing me. Stopped seeing me as intelligent. Stopped seeing me as capable. Stopped seeing me at all. And when people stop respecting you, they start getting careless. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. Nothing special. Nothing dramatic. The kind of ordinary day nobody remembers until it changes their life. I was sitting in Derek's home office trying to print tax documents. He was out of town attending some executive conference in Miami. At least that's what he told me. The printer wasn't connecting. I clicked through a few folders looking for the file he mentioned. Then an email notification popped up. I wasn't trying to read it. Honestly, I wasn't. But one sentence appeared in the preview window, and my stomach dropped. By the time she figures it out, everything will already be protected. Protected. The word hit me like ice water. Because who talks about protecting things from their wife? My hand froze on the mouse. For a moment, I almost looked away. Almost. Then I saw my own name. Angela. There it was. Right in the subject line. My name. Attached to a conversation I knew nothing about. A conversation involving my husband. And suddenly every instinct I had was screaming, read it. So I did. And what I discovered shattered something inside me. The email wasn't romantic. There was no mistress. No secret family. No hidden children. I almost wished there had been. At least infidelity would have been familiar. This was something colder. More calculated. The email chain involved Derek, a financial advisor, and a corporate attorney. 3 people discussing my future. Without me. As if I were a problem. Not a wife. Not a partner. Problem. I scrolled slowly. Each sentence worse than the last. One message read, given Angela's lack of direct involvement in the business entities, exposure appears minimal. Exposure. Minimal. I sat there staring at the screen. 19 years together. And I was being discussed like a legal inconvenience. Then I kept reading. And that's when my blood ran cold. Derek had been moving assets. Quietly. Strategically. For nearly 2 years. Properties. Investments. Accounts. Business interests. Everything. Transferred. Reorganized. Shielded. Hidden behind trusts and corporate structures. The entire conversation revolved around one assumption. That eventually there would be a divorce. And when that happened, I would walk away with almost nothing. I stopped breathing. Not literally, but close. Because suddenly every strange conversation from the last 2 years made sense. Every unexplained signature request. Every rushed document. Every evasive answer. Every time he said, don't worry about it, babe. It's just business. Business. No, it wasn't business. It was preparation. Preparation for betrayal. I felt sick. But then I saw something that hurt even more. A message from Derek himself. Just one paragraph. One paragraph that revealed exactly who he had become. It read, Angela is emotional. She doesn't understand finance. She's always trusted me completely. I read it again. And again. And again. Not because I didn't understand it. Because I couldn't believe it. Emotional. The woman who had balanced household budgets during layoffs. The woman who negotiated hospital bills. The woman who managed every family emergency. The woman who held everything together when his father got sick. That woman was emotional. But it got worse. The next sentence nearly made me cry. Not from weakness. From grief. She'll never see any of this coming. I closed my eyes. And for the first time in years, I allowed myself to tell the truth. My husband did not love me. Not anymore. Because people who love you don't spend years building traps for you. People who love you don't sit across from you at dinner, while secretly planning your financial destruction. People who love you don't weaponize your trust. And Derek had weaponized mine. I sat in that office for almost an hour. Completely still. Thinking. Processing. Remembering. And once I started remembering, I couldn't stop. The expensive gifts. The sudden generosity. The vacations. The designer bags. The luxury dinners. All those things I thought were acts of love. Now I saw them differently. Distractions. Smoke. A magician's trick. Keep her looking over here. While everything important happens over there. I felt humiliated. Not because he was rich. Not because of the money. Because he thought I was stupid. That hurt more. Far more. Money comes and goes. Respect is different. And I realized something painful. Derek hadn't respected me for years. I just hadn't wanted to see it. That night I barely slept. Every memory replayed differently. Every conversation carried new meaning. Every smile looked fake. Every promise sounded hollow. By morning I knew one thing. I couldn't confront him. Not yet. The old Angela would have. The younger Angela. The one who believed honesty automatically created honesty. But experience had taught me something. Never warn someone who's already plotting against you, especially when they think you're unaware. So I stayed quiet. And that's when my education began. For the next 6 weeks, I became a student, not of revenge, of reality. I started reading, researching, learning, financial law, trust structures, asset transfers, marital property, business entities, tax records, everything. The more I learned, the more frightened I became, because Derek had been thorough, very thorough, but not perfect. Nobody is. And every system has weaknesses, especially systems built by arrogant people. Meanwhile, the disrespect intensified, almost as if Derek sensed he was getting closer to whatever finish line he'd created in his head. One Friday evening, he invited me to a dinner with several executives. The entire night felt strange, manufactured, like I was being evaluated. At one point, a man asked how long we'd been married. 19 years, I answered. The man smiled. That's impressive. Before I could respond, Derek laughed. Sometimes longevity just means people get comfortable. The table laughed. Everyone except me. Comfortable. The word lingered, because there was something underneath it. Something ugly. I could feel it. Then another executive raised his glass. To success. Everyone cheered. And Derek added something quietly. Something only I heard. To upgrading. My heart stopped. Not because the comment was subtle, because it wasn't. And for the first time, he wanted me to hear it. The mask was slipping. Slowly. But it was slipping. When we got home, I stood in the kitchen washing dishes. Derek walked in, loosened his tie, poured himself a drink. Then he leaned against the counter, watching me. There was a strange confidence in his eyes. The confidence of someone who believes they've already won. You know what your problem is, Angela? I turned slowly. What? He smiled. You think effort deserves rewards. I stared at him. He continued. That's not how the world works. The room felt colder. What does that mean? It means people earn their place. Earn. Place. Levels. There were those words again. Always those words. Like he joined some cult of status. I dried my hands carefully. What place have I not earned? For a moment. He didn't answer. And somehow that hurt more. Because the silence told me everything. Then he shrugged. You wouldn't understand. I nodded slowly. Not because I agreed. Because I finally understood him. There is a difference. A huge difference. That night, while he slept beside me, I made a decision. Not a dramatic decision. Not an emotional one. A quiet one. The most dangerous kind. I would stop trying to save the marriage and start protecting myself. The next week I met someone. Not secretly. Not illegally. Not romantically. A lawyer. A woman named Denise Walker. And from the moment she shook my hand, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Safe. She listened. Really listened. No interruptions. No assumptions. No condescension. Just attention. When I finished explaining everything, she sat back in her chair. Silent. Thinking. Then she asked one question. A question that changed everything. Angela, what makes your husband so certain he's smarter than you? I blinked. Nobody had asked that. Everyone focused on what Derek was doing. Denise focused on why. And that mattered. A lot. Because confidence leaves fingerprints. Arrogance leaves evidence. And Derek had plenty of both. When I showed her copies of the emails, her eyebrows rose. Then she smiled. Not a happy smile. A lawyer smile. The kind that makes powerful people nervous. Interesting. My pulse quickened. What? She tapped one page. Then another. Then another. And suddenly her smile grew wider. Oh, this is very interesting. I leaned forward. What are you seeing? Denise looked directly into my eyes. And for the first time since discovering the emails, I felt genuine hope. Because she wasn't worried. Not even a little. In fact, she looked almost amused. Then she said 5 words I'll never forget. Your husband made assumptions. I swallowed. What kind of assumptions? Denise folded her hands, the smile never leaving her face. The kind judges hate. And in that moment, for the very first time, I realized Derek's plan might not end the way he thought it would. Not even close. But neither of us knew just how badly he'd miscalculated. Because 3 days later, I discovered something hidden inside a corporate filing. Something so explosive. It would eventually turn an ordinary divorce hearing into complete courtroom silence. And when the judge finally saw it, everything changed. After meeting Denise Walker, I stopped looking at my marriage through the eyes of a wife. I started looking at it through the eyes of an observer. And once I did, I noticed things that made my stomach turn. It's amazing what you miss when you're busy loving someone. And it's amazing what becomes obvious when you finally stop making excuses for them. Derek wasn't just disrespecting me anymore. He was rehearsing life without me. Every conversation felt different. Every interaction carried an edge. Every smile looked staged. And the more confident he became, the more careless he got. That was the irony. Arrogance has a way of making people expose themselves. They start believing they're untouchable. They stop checking whether anyone is watching. And Derek had stopped checking. One Saturday morning, I walked into our kitchen and found him scrolling through luxury real estate listings. Massive homes, private gates, infinity pools, the kind of houses designed to impress strangers, not build families. He didn't notice me standing there. Not at first. Then he looked up. Oh. Just oh. No smile. No warmth. No invitation to join him. Just oh. As if I were a guest in my own house. What are you looking at? I asked. He turned the tablet slightly. A few properties. I nodded. They're beautiful. His lips curved. Not kindly. Not proudly. Condescendingly. Some people appreciate what's possible. Some people. There it was again. Always those little phrases. Never direct enough to start an argument. Always sharp enough to leave a wound. I poured coffee and remained silent. That seemed to frustrate him. Because people like Derek don't just want conflict. They want reactions. They want proof that their words have power. And I had stopped giving him that proof. The quiet bothered him. More than any argument ever could. 3 weeks later things got worse. Much worse. His company hosted a charity gala downtown. Hundreds of guests. Executives. Investors. Politicians. The kind of room where everyone pretended to be more important than they actually were. I wore a simple navy dress. Elegant. Nothing flashy. I've never believed class needed to announce itself. Derek spent most of the evening talking to people who treated money like a personality trait. Near the end of the event, I found myself standing with several women discussing community projects. One of them complimented a youth mentorship program I'd helped organize. She seemed genuinely interested. Then Derek walked over. The woman smiled. Your wife was telling us about the mentorship work she does. Before I could finish answering, Derek laughed. Actually laughed. Oh, Angela loves her little projects. Little projects. The women exchanged glances. The air changed instantly. You know those moments when a room suddenly becomes uncomfortable? When nobody knows what to say. This was one of those moments. I smiled politely, but inside, something settled. Not anger. Not sadness. Acceptance. Because when someone repeatedly tells you who they are, eventually you have to believe them. The ride home was quiet. Derek seemed pleased with himself. As if humiliating me had somehow elevated him. Halfway through the drive, he said something unexpected. You know, appearances matter. I stared out the window. Do they? They do at my level. My level. Again. Always levels. Always hierarchy. Always status. Never character. Never loyalty. Never love. I turned toward him. For a second, I almost told him everything. The emails. The lawyer. The evidence. All of it. But then I remembered Denise's words. Confidence leaves fingerprints. Arrogance leaves evidence. So I stayed silent. And Derek kept talking. That turned out to be a mistake. His mistake. Not mine. Because over the next month, he revealed far more than he realized. One evening he hosted a private dinner at our home. Several executives attended. A few investors. some people from his social circle. I played hostess, smiled, served food, listened, observed, and what I heard changed everything. Near the end of the night, the conversation shifted toward marriage. One man joked about how expensive divorce could be. The table laughed. Derek laughed loudest. Then he lifted his glass and said something that made the entire room chuckle. "Only if you're careless." The room erupted. Everyone found it hilarious. Everyone except me. And one guest, a silver-haired attorney sitting across the table. He didn't laugh. Not even a little. He simply watched Derek. Studied him. Like he just learned something important. I never forgot that look. Because later, that same attorney would become one of the most significant witnesses in my case. Though none of us knew it yet. A few days later, Denise called. Her voice sounded unusually focused. "Angela, I need you to come in." Immediately. No explanation. No details. Just immediately. My pulse quickened. The moment I arrived, she closed her office door. Then she slid several documents across the desk. Corporate filings. Trust registrations. Business disclosures. First they looked ordinary. Then she pointed to a name. I frowned. "I don't understand." "Look closer." I did. And suddenly, I felt my heart skip. Because there it was. My name. Not once. Repeatedly. Across multiple documents. I blinked. Confused. Why is my name here? Denise leaned back. That's exactly the question. I looked again. Then again. The realization came slowly. Painfully slowly. Like a door opening 1 inch at a time. Many of the structures Derek believed protected him included me. Legally. Directly. Formally. In writing. Years earlier. Back when he trusted me. Back when he still saw us as a team. He had signed documents. Filed paperwork. Established ownership interests. And apparently, he forgot. Or worse, he never bothered reading what he signed. The irony was almost unbelievable. For years he had treated me like I wasn't intelligent enough to understand finances. Meanwhile, his own arrogance had created the very evidence that threatened his plan. I stared at Denise. What does this mean? She folded her hands. It means your husband has a problem. The words sent a chill through me. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I finally saw the truth. Derek wasn't nearly as clever as he thought he was. And people who overestimate themselves often make catastrophic mistakes. Still, there was more. Much more. Denise wasn't finished. She opened another folder. This one thicker. Far thicker. And when she handed it to me, my confusion turned to shock. Because inside were records I'd never seen before. Expense reports. Travel records. Corporate reimbursements. Private invoices. A pattern emerged quickly. Too quickly. Trips that didn't match company schedules. Expenses filed under questionable categories. Luxury purchases disguised as business costs. My chest tightened. Is this what I think it is? Denise's expression hardened. It might be. I looked down again. The numbers were staggering. Far beyond simple mistakes. Far beyond sloppy bookkeeping. If these records meant what they appeared to mean, Derek wasn't just hiding assets. He might have been violating company policies. Possibly much more. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Denise said something that echoed in my mind for weeks. Angela, powerful people usually fall the same way. I looked up. How? They start believing rules are for other people. Silence filled the room. And suddenly I thought about all those dinner parties. All those arrogant conversations. All those speeches about levels. All those comments about deserving success. Maybe the real danger wasn't Derek's money. Maybe it was the story he'd built around it. The belief that wealth made him untouchable. The belief that status erased consequences. The belief that everyone else was beneath him. Because history is full of people destroyed by those beliefs. And Derek was beginning to look exactly like one of them. But then something happened that neither Denise nor I expected. Something that changed the entire trajectory of the case. A week later, Derek came home unusually cheerful. Almost euphoric. He poured himself expensive whiskey. Turned on music. Started walking around the house like he'd just won the lottery. At first I didn't understand. Then he made an announcement. One sentence. One sentence that revealed exactly how confident he'd become. I've got some news. I looked up from my book. What kind of news? His smile widened. The kind of smile people wear when they're certain nobody can stop them. Then he said, I'm filing next month. My heart pounded, but I kept my face neutral. Filing. The divorce. It was finally happening. The thing he'd been planning for years. The thing he thought would destroy me. And then he made a mistake. A massive mistake. Because he mistook my silence for weakness. Again. He mistook my composure for ignorance. Again. He mistook dignity for surrender. Again. So he kept talking. And every word dug the hole deeper. Much deeper. Until finally he said something so arrogant. So unbelievably arrogant. That even I struggled to believe it. Something that would later be repeated in a courtroom. Word for word. And when the judge eventually heard it, the expression on his face said everything. But that moment was still coming. For now, I simply listened and let Derek underestimate me one final time. The strange thing about betrayal is that it doesn't always arrive with chaos. Sometimes it arrives with confidence. A smile. A handshake. A man who believes he's already won. And that was exactly how Derek looked during the weeks leading up to the divorce filing. Victorious. Almost relaxed. Like someone crossing a finish line nobody else could see. The more confident he became, the crueler he got. Not openly. Not at first. Cruel people rarely start with honesty. They start with permission. They test boundaries. Push limits. See what they can get away with. And Derek had spent years testing mine. Now he was sprinting past them. 3 days after announcing he was filing, he invited several people to our home. No warning. No discussion. Just an email telling me guests would arrive at 7. Guests. In my house. The house I'd maintained for nearly 2 decades. The house where I'd hosted birthdays, family reunions, graduations, holiday dinners, and funerals. The house that carried pieces of my life in every room. Yet somehow Derek was acting like I was temporary. Like I was the visitor. I greeted everyone politely. Smiled. Served dinner. Played my role. But something felt different. The atmosphere was strange. Tighter. Like people knew something I didn't. Then I realized the truth. Most of them did. Halfway through dinner, one of Derek's executive friends raised a glass. To new beginnings. The table cheered. Derek grinned. Then several guests exchanged knowing looks. My stomach tightened. I wasn't imagining it. This wasn't a celebration. It was an announcement. And I was the last person being informed. One woman touched my arm gently. The fake sympathy in her eyes made my skin crawl. Oh, Angela. Just those 2 words. Nothing more. But they told me everything. She knew. Everyone knew. Everyone except the woman whose life was being discussed. And suddenly I understood something painful. Derek wasn't just planning a divorce. He was performing one. Turning it into a social event. A status move. A public rebranding. I sat quietly while conversations floated around me. Then I heard one executive say, sometimes people outgrow situations. Outgrow situations. The others nodded, as if they were discussing a business acquisition. Not a marriage. Not 19 years of shared life. Not a human being. A situation. I looked at Derek, and what I saw nearly broke my heart. Not because he seemed guilty, because he didn't. Not even a little. He looked proud. That was the worst part. The absolute worst part. The man I once loved had become the kind of person who mistook cruelty for strength. And he genuinely believed it made him powerful. After everyone left, I stood alone in the kitchen, stacking plates, cleaning glasses, trying to process what had happened. A few minutes later, Derek walked in. He loosened his tie, poured another drink, then leaned against the counter, watching me. The silence stretched, long enough to become uncomfortable. Then he spoke. You know something? I continued washing dishes. What? His voice was calm. Too calm. I think people stay together too long sometimes. I didn't respond. So he continued. They get comfortable. There was that word again. Comfortable. His favorite insult disguised as wisdom. I dried a plate carefully, then set it down. Still silent. And that silence bothered him. I could see it. Because people who need superiority also need witnesses. Without a reaction, the performance loses its audience. Finally, he laughed. A short laugh. The kind people use when they're talking down to someone. You really don't get it, do you? I turned toward him. For a moment our eyes locked. And something strange happened. For the first time in years. I wasn't intimidated. Not even slightly. Because once you see someone clearly, their power shrinks. What exactly don't I get? I asked. His smile widened. Then he said something that would replay in my mind for months. You don't understand how the world works. The arrogance in his voice was breathtaking. As if he alone possessed secret knowledge. As if everyone else existed on a lower level of understanding. And suddenly I realized something. Derek wasn't chasing wealth anymore. He was chasing superiority. Money was simply the costume. The next morning I received divorce papers. No conversation. No warning. No attempt at dignity. Just papers. Delivered by a process server. Like I was a business dispute. Like 19 years could fit inside an envelope. I stared at the documents for a long time. Longer than I expected. Not because I was shocked. Because I was grieving. Not the marriage. That had been dying for years. I was grieving the man I thought existed. The man who once held my hand in tiny apartments. The man who once called me his partner. The man who once believed in we. That man was gone. And maybe he had been gone longer than I realized. The filing itself was exactly what Denise expected. Aggressive. Confident. Built around the assumption that Derek controlled everything. Assets. Properties. Accounts. Investments. Everything. Reading it felt surreal. Because I already knew what his attorneys didn't. The foundation beneath their strategy wasn't nearly as solid as they thought. But I stayed quiet. That became my superpower. Silence. Not weakness. Discipline. And discipline is dangerous when arrogant people mistake it for surrender. Over the next several weeks, Derek became almost impossible to recognize. He started spending more time with people who reinforced his ego. People who applauded every decision. People who treated empathy like a weakness. People obsessed with appearances. Then came the incident that finally opened my eyes completely. The incident that removed every remaining doubt. It happened at a private charity fundraiser. One of those upscale events where everyone pretends generosity and status are the same thing. The ballroom glittered. Champagne flowed. People smiled with their teeth instead of their hearts. I was speaking with an elderly woman involved in community outreach when Derek approached. He wasn't alone. A younger woman walked beside him. Tall. Polished. Designer dress. Perfect smile. The kind of smile that looked expensive. The woman extended her hand. Nice to meet you. I shook it politely. Then she said something that made my stomach turn. Oh, I've heard so much about you. There was a brief pause. Tiny. Almost invisible. But loaded with meaning. Then Derek laughed. The woman laughed. And suddenly I understood. They had discussed me. Privately. Repeatedly. Enough to create inside jokes. Enough to create narratives. Enough to create assumptions. I remained calm. But inside. Something closed forever. Not my heart. A door. The door that had kept me hoping. The fundraiser ended shortly afterward. As we walked toward the parking area, Derek seemed unusually pleased. Almost energized. Then he delivered the speech. The one that revealed exactly who he had become. The speech that eventually found its way into court records. The speech that would later leave a courtroom completely silent. It started casually. Almost conversationally. I've worked hard for this life. I nodded. You have. He continued. I've earned everything I have. Again. I nodded. Then his expression changed. Subtly. But enough. And suddenly the mask disappeared. Not slipped. Disappeared. I own everything now. The words hung in the air. Cold. Heavy. Arrogant. I said nothing. So he kept going. Big mistake. Very big mistake. I built this life. Silence. I built these businesses. Silence. I built this reputation. Silence. Then he looked directly at me. and finally said the sentence that changed everything. The sentence from the beginning of this story. The sentence I will never forget. I can't live with a black woman no more. For a moment, everything stopped. The sounds, the traffic, the evening air, even my breathing. I simply stared at him, trying to understand how someone could become this ugly inside. Trying to understand how a man who once cried in my arms could say something so cruel. Then I noticed something. The younger woman, the one standing nearby. Her smile disappeared. Instantly. And for the first time that evening, she looked uncomfortable. Very uncomfortable. Because even she hadn't expected that. Nobody had. Derek realized it immediately. He tried to laugh. Tried to soften it. Tried to disguise it as a joke. But it was too late. Truth had escaped. And once truth escapes, you can't force it back inside. I left without another word. Not because I was defeated. Because I was done. Completely done. That night I sat alone in my bedroom. The guest bedroom. The room I'd moved into weeks earlier. And I replayed everything. The insults. The manipulation. The arrogance. The planning. The lies. The contempt. Then my phone rang. Denise. I answered. The moment she heard my voice, she knew something had happened. What is it? I told her. Everything. Word for word. The silence on the other end lasted several seconds. Then she asked one question. Were there witnesses? I thought about the younger woman, the valet nearby, the fundraiser guests entering the parking area. Several people. Quite a few people. Yes. Denise exhaled slowly. Then she said something that made my pulse quicken. Good. Good. The word surprised me. Very much. Then Denise explained. And the more she talked, the more I understood. Because Derek had just done something incredibly reckless. Something that could change how the court viewed everything. Not just the marriage. Everything. His credibility. His motives. His conduct. His intentions. All of it. And if that wasn't enough, another surprise was already on its way. Because less than a week later, a former business associate of Derek's would contact our legal team. Voluntarily. Unexpectedly. And what he brought with him would shake the entire case. Including Derek's own attorneys. Especially his attorneys. Because hidden inside those documents was a piece of evidence nobody saw coming. Not Derek. Not his legal team. Not even Denise. A single document. A single signature. A single date. And once the judge saw it, the phrase "I own everything now" would become the biggest mistake Derek ever made. People think justice happens in one dramatic moment. A gavel slams. A judge speaks. The bad person loses. The good person wins. That's the movie version. Real life is different. Real justice is usually slow, patient, quiet, like water wearing down stone. And that's exactly how Derek's collapse began. Not with an explosion. With a crack. A very small crack. The kind arrogant people don't notice until it's too late. 6 days after Derek made his "I own everything now" speech, Denise called me into her office. Her voice sounded different. Focused. Controlled. Dangerously controlled. When I arrived, she was reviewing documents with 2 members of her legal team. Nobody looked relaxed. Nobody looked casual. Something was happening. I sat down. Denise closed the folder in front of her. Then she said 4 words. We have a witness. My pulse jumped. A witness to what? She slid a business card across the desk. I looked at the name. Nothing seemed familiar. Who is he? A former associate. My stomach tightened. Former associate. Those 2 words rarely lead anywhere good, especially in legal cases. Denise leaned forward. Apparently your husband burned a few bridges. I almost laughed. Of course he had. The man who spent years looking down on people eventually runs out of people willing to stand beneath him. What does he know? I asked. Denise's expression hardened. A lot. The next hour felt surreal. The witness had voluntarily approached our legal team. Not because we found him. Because he found us. That detail mattered. A lot. According to him, Derek had spent years bragging. Years. About how clever he was. How protected he was. How nobody could touch him. How he had outsmarted everyone, especially me. That last part hurt. Even after everything. Still hurt. Because arrogance wasn't enough for Derek. He needed an audience. He needed people to applaud his superiority. And apparently he'd been performing for years. The witness provided emails, messages, meeting notes, conversations. But one document stood above everything else. One document. One signature. One date. The very thing Denise had mentioned on the phone. I stared at the page. At first I didn't understand why everyone in the room seemed excited. Then Denise pointed to a paragraph. And suddenly, everything clicked. Years earlier, when Derek and I were still operating as a team, he'd executed a legal agreement tied to one of his business structures. Nothing unusual. At least not at the time. Except there was one problem. A very big problem. The agreement explicitly acknowledged my ownership interest. Not implied. Not suggested. Acknowledged. In writing. Signed. Dated. Witnessed. Recorded. Legally binding. The room went silent as I continued reading. I looked up. How did he forget this? Denise gave a short laugh. Not because it was funny. Because it was unbelievable. He didn't think he needed to remember. And there it was. The disease underneath everything. Arrogance. The belief that details don't matter because you're smarter than everyone else. The belief that rules only apply to other people. The belief that nobody will ever challenge your version of reality. Derek had spent years creating a story. A story where he built everything. Owned everything. Controlled everything. The problem was, documents don't care about stories. Documents care about facts. And facts were becoming very inconvenient. The first major hearing arrived sooner than expected. Nothing final. Nothing dramatic. Just a preliminary proceeding. At least that's what everyone thought. Including Derek. Especially Derek. The courtroom wasn't crowded. A few attorneys. Court staff. Observers. The usual legal atmosphere. Quiet. Professional. Controlled. Then Derek walked in. And the energy changed immediately. Not because he was important. Because he acted important. There is a difference. His suit looked expensive. His watch looked expensive. His confidence looked expensive. Everything about him seemed designed to communicate status. He barely looked at me. Barely acknowledged my existence. Instead, he greeted people with the easy confidence of a man who believed victory was already guaranteed. I watched him carefully. And for the first time, I noticed something. His confidence wasn't strength. It was certainty. And certainty is dangerous. Because when reality changes, certain people shatter harder than anyone else. The hearing began. Routine matters. Procedural discussions. Scheduling. Document exchanges. Nothing dramatic. Then Denise stood and introduced the first issue. The ownership documents. The room remained calm. Professional. Normal. Until opposing counsel reviewed the paperwork. I watched their expressions change. Slowly. Subtly. But unmistakably. One attorney leaned toward another. Whispered something. The second attorney frowned. Then reviewed the document again. Longer this time. Far longer. For the first time all morning. Derek looked confused. The judge requested copies. Read carefully. Turned pages. Read again. Silence settled across the courtroom. Heavy silence. The kind lawyers immediately recognize. Not because something dramatic happened. Because something important happened. Then the judge asked a question. A simple question. One question. And nobody on Derek's side seemed eager to answer. I noticed the first hint of tension in Derek's posture. Tiny. Almost invisible. But it was there. Crack. The first crack. The hearing ended without fireworks. No ruling. No major announcement. Nothing cinematic. Yet when everyone left, Derek wasn't smiling anymore. That mattered. Because for months he had been smiling. Months. Now he looked irritated. Confused. Uncomfortable. And uncomfortable people make mistakes. Big mistakes. Over the following weeks, discovery continued. More records surfaced. More documents emerged. More inconsistencies appeared. Every time Derek explained one issue, two new questions appeared. Every answer created another problem. Meanwhile, his behavior became increasingly erratic. The man who once seemed untouchable was becoming frustrated, and frustration was revealing his true character. One afternoon, we attended a mediation session. Several attorneys present, neutral professionals, a controlled environment, the kind designed to reduce conflict. Derek arrived late, already annoyed, already defensive. The meeting started calmly. Then financial disclosures became the topic. The atmosphere shifted immediately. Questions, clarifications, missing information, inconsistencies. Nothing dramatic individually, but together. They formed a pattern, a troubling pattern. I watched Derek's jaw tighten. His responses grew shorter, sharper, less patient. Then it happened. The moment I'll never forget. One mediator asked a routine question. Routine, simple, professional, and Derek snapped. Not completely, not loudly, but enough. Enough to reveal what had been hiding underneath all that confidence. I built everything. The room froze. There it was again. The mantra, the story, the identity he'd created. I built everything. Nobody responded immediately. Then the mediator calmly asked, "By yourself?" The silence that followed was extraordinary, because for the first time, Derek didn't have an answer. Not a good one. Not a convincing one. Not one supported by documents, or evidence, or history. Just silence. And silence can be devastating, especially when you've spent years talking. That evening Denise called. She sounded cautiously optimistic, which for a lawyer is practically excitement. "We're making progress." I sat quietly. What kind of progress? The kind that changes outcomes. Those words stayed with me. Changes outcomes. Because until then I'd been focused on surviving, getting through it, protecting myself. But now something else was happening. Truth was emerging. Slowly, relentlessly. And truth has a strange effect on lies. It starves them. The more facts appeared, the harder it became for Derek to maintain the image he'd spent years creating. Still, the biggest moment had not arrived. Not even close. Because several weeks later, a second witness came forward. This one far more dangerous, far more unexpected, and far more credible. A witness whose testimony would eventually cause complete silence inside the courtroom. A witness nobody could easily dismiss. Not Derek. Not his attorneys. Not anyone. And the shocking part? It wasn't a former employee. It wasn't a business rival. It wasn't someone seeking revenge. It was someone from Derek's own circle. Someone who had spent years listening, watching, observing. Someone who finally decided they couldn't stay quiet anymore. When Denise told me who it was, I nearly dropped the phone. Because out of all the people in the world, I never expected this person to be the one who changed everything. And when they finally took the stand, the entire case shifted. There are moments in life that arrive so unexpectedly, they divide your world into before and after. The day Denise told me the identity of the second witness was one of those moments. I was sitting in her office when she closed a folder and looked up. For a second, she didn't say anything, just watched me, almost as if she was preparing me. Then she spoke. "We heard back from the witness." I nodded. "And?" Denise exhaled slowly. "It's Derek's sister." I honestly thought I'd misheard her. His sister. Monica. The same Monica who sat quietly at family dinners? The same Monica who never challenged Derek publicly? The same Monica who always seemed to avoid conflict? That Monica? I stared at Denise. "You're sure?" "Very." I leaned back in my chair, trying to process it. Because Monica wasn't just family. She was loyal family. The kind of person who protected relatives even when they didn't deserve protection. For years, she'd remained silent. For years, she'd watched. For years, she'd looked the other way. So what changed? That question haunted me until Denise answered it herself. Apparently, she reached her limit. And sometimes that's all it takes. Not one huge betrayal. Not one giant scandal. Just years of watching someone become a worse version of themselves. Until eventually you can't pretend anymore. The day we met Monica, I noticed something immediately. She looked exhausted. Not physically, emotionally, like she'd been carrying something heavy for a very long time. She sat across from us, hands folded, eyes fixed on the table, and for nearly 30 seconds, nobody spoke. Then she looked up, directly at me. The guilt in her eyes almost broke my heart. "I'm sorry." Just 2 words. Simple, but genuine. More genuine than anything I'd heard from Derek in years. I swallowed hard. "Sorry for what?" Monica's eyes filled with tears. Not dramatic tears. The quiet kind. The painful kind. The kind people cry when they've been ashamed for a long time. For not saying something sooner. Silence filled the room. Then she began talking. And once she started, she couldn't stop. Years of stories. Years of conversations. Years of comments. Things Derek said privately. Things he never thought would leave the room. Things he assumed nobody would ever repeat. The picture she painted was ugly. Very ugly. According to Monica, Derek's obsession with status had become unbearable. Every conversation centered around money. Every opinion centered around appearances. Every relationship became transactional. Useful people. Important people. Connected people. Everyone categorized. Everyone ranked. Everyone assigned a value. And if that wasn't disturbing enough, she confirmed something even worse. The comments about race. The comments I'd tried to dismiss. The comments I'd hoped were isolated moments. They weren't. Not even close. Over the years, Derek had become increasingly obsessed with image. And somewhere along the way, he began viewing me as an obstacle. Not because of who I was. Because of what he thought people saw. The realization made me physically sick. 19 years. 19 years together. And somehow the man I'd loved became ashamed of the very woman who helped build his life. Monica wiped her eyes. Then she said something I'll never forget. Derek started believing success changed his blood. The room went silent. Because everyone understood exactly what she meant. Success hadn't elevated him. It had disconnected him. From family. From humility. From gratitude. From reality. Most importantly, from himself. The weeks that followed were brutal for Derek. Discovery continued. Witnesses spoke. Documents surfaced. Questions multiplied. The version of reality he'd spent years constructing was beginning to collapse. And the worst part? He could see it happening. You could tell. Every court appearance looked different now. The confidence remained. But it wasn't natural anymore. It looked forced. Manufactured. Like someone trying desperately to convince himself. The smile never quite reached his eyes. The swagger felt rehearsed. The certainty seemed fragile. And everybody noticed. Including the judge. Especially the judge. One hearing in particular changed everything. The courtroom felt unusually tense that morning. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just tense. Like everyone sensed something significant was coming. Denise certainly did. She arrived carrying several large binders. Far more than usual. Her legal team looked focused. Almost energized. Meanwhile, Derek seemed irritated. Not confident. Irritated. And irritation is often fear wearing a disguise. The proceedings began normally. Documents. Questions. Procedural matters. Then Denise called Monica. The room became very quiet. Monica walked to the witness stand. Took the oath. Sat down. And for the first few minutes, everything remained calm. Background questions. Family history. Relationship context. Nothing explosive. Then Denise shifted direction. And the atmosphere changed immediately. Did your brother ever discuss his marriage with you? Monica hesitated. Then nodded. Frequently. What kinds of things did he say? A long pause followed. The kind of pause that makes people uncomfortable. The kind that makes jurists pay attention. Then Monica answered. And every word landed like a hammer. She described the contempt. The arrogance. The obsession with appearances. The comments about levels. The discussions about upgrading. The belief that certain people enhanced his image while others damaged it. Each statement chipped away at the image Derek desperately wanted the court to see. The image of a self-made, reasonable businessman. The image he'd spent years selling. Then Denise asked the question. The question. Did your brother ever discuss Angela's race? The courtroom froze. Completely. Monica looked toward Derek. For a moment their eyes met. And something painful passed between them. A lifetime of history. Family. Disappointment. Then Monica turned back toward Denise. Yes. One word. One devastating word. Derek's attorney objected immediately. The judge overruled. And just like that, the floodgates opened. Monica described conversations, comments, statements, patterns. Not one isolated incident. A pattern. And patterns are difficult to explain away, especially under oath. I watched Derek carefully. His face remained expressionless. Mostly. But every now and then, tiny cracks appeared. A clenched jaw. A tightened hand. A forced swallow. The signs were subtle, yet unmistakable. The testimony lasted nearly 2 hours. And by the time it ended, the atmosphere inside the courtroom felt completely different. Because now everyone understood something important. This wasn't merely a financial dispute. This was a story about motive, about contempt, about arrogance, about a man who genuinely believed he was entitled to rewrite reality. Unfortunately for Derek, reality had documents, and the documents were about to speak. A week later came the hearing Denise had been preparing for. The hearing she'd spent months building toward. The hearing involving the ownership structures, the trusts, the entities, the transfers, all the complicated financial machinery Derek believed protected him. The courtroom was packed, far more crowded than usual. Word had spread. People were curious. Attorneys always get curious when complicated financial cases start unraveling. The hearing began. Hours passed. Experts testified. Records were reviewed. Arguments were presented. Then came the moment. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just devastating. The judge requested a particular file. One specific file. A file connected to an older business structure. The structure Derek had largely ignored. The structure he assumed nobody would examine carefully. The structure containing the document. That document. The one with the signature. The one with the date. The one Derek apparently forgot existed. I felt my heart pounding. Even Denise looked unusually focused. The courtroom became so quiet you could hear papers turning. Then the judge began reading. Slowly, carefully, methodically, line by line. Nobody interrupted. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The only sound was the judge's voice. Reading, reading, reading. And with every paragraph, the atmosphere grew heavier. Because the document wasn't vague. It wasn't ambiguous. It wasn't open to interpretation. It was painfully clear. Painfully. The judge continued reading, then stopped, looked over his glasses, and asked a question. A very simple question. One that instantly changed the room. Mr. Williams, is this your signature? Silence. Complete silence. Derek stared at the document, then at the judge, then back at the document. The confidence was gone now. Completely gone. For the first time since this entire process began. He looked genuinely shaken. Not annoyed. Not irritated. Shaken. His attorney leaned toward him. Whispered something. Derek whispered back. The judge waited. Patiently. The silence felt endless. Finally, Derek answered. Yes. One word. And everything changed. Because that single answer confirmed what Denise had known for months. The ownership interests. The acknowledgments. The legal rights. The protections. The very things Derek claimed didn't exist. Had existed all along. Signed by his own hand. Created by his own decisions. Preserved in official records. The courtroom remained silent. Nobody celebrated. Nobody gasped. Nobody cheered. The moment was too significant for that. Instead, people simply absorbed it. The truth. The undeniable truth. And the most devastating part wasn't the document itself. It was what the document revealed. Derek hadn't been outsmarted by me. He hadn't been trapped. He hadn't been deceived. He had defeated himself. Through arrogance. Through carelessness. Through the belief that he was always the smartest person in the room. The hearing ended shortly afterward. But the damage was done. Irreversible damage. As we walked out of the courtroom, I noticed something extraordinary. For the first time in years, Derek wouldn't look at me. Not once. Not even a glance. Because the power dynamic had shifted. Not publicly. Not emotionally. Legally. Factually. Permanently. And yet, the biggest collapse was still ahead. Because after the judge finished reviewing the remaining evidence, he would make observations that nobody expected. Observations so direct, so precise, that the entire courtroom would sit in stunned silence, including Derek, including his attorneys, including me. And when those words were finally spoken, the man who once said, "I own everything now," would discover what real ownership actually means. After the hearing where Derek finally admitted the signature was his, something changed. Not just in the courtroom. In him. You can tell when a person is running out of places to hide. Their confidence starts arriving late. Their excuses arrive early. And their eyes begin searching for exits. For months, Derek had walked into every hearing like a man entering his own victory party. Now he walked in like a man carrying invisible weight. Heavy weight. The kind nobody else can carry for you. The final phase of the case stretched over several weeks. Financial experts testified. Additional records were reviewed. Arguments were presented. But honestly, the facts were no longer the biggest story. The story was credibility. And Derek's credibility was collapsing. One piece at a time. The judge had seen the emails, the ownership documents, the witness testimony, the financial transfers, the contradictions, the explanations that changed depending on who was asking questions. Individually, some things could be explained. Together, they painted a picture. And judges see patterns for a living. That reality was becoming impossible to ignore. The final hearing arrived on a rainy Thursday morning. I remember the weather because everything felt strangely symbolic. The sky was gray. The courthouse felt quiet. And somehow I felt calmer than I had in years. Not because I knew exactly what would happen. Because I finally understood something. No ruling could give me back the years I'd lost trying to earn respect from someone determined not to give it. That battle was over. And accepting that truth felt like freedom. When I entered the courtroom, Denise was already there. Organized. Focused. Prepared. She looked at me and smiled. Not a victory smile. A reassuring one. The kind that says, no matter what happens, you're going to be okay. And for the first time, I believed it. Derek arrived 10 minutes later. The difference was impossible to miss. Even from across the room. He looked older. Not physically. Emotionally. Like the past year had aged him in ways expensive suits couldn't hide. He avoided eye contact. Avoided conversation. Avoided almost everyone. The same man who once loved being seen suddenly seemed desperate not to be noticed. And that told me everything. The proceedings began. Hours passed. Arguments were made. Evidence reviewed. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. The judge began speaking. Slowly. Carefully. The way experienced judges do when they know every word matters. Nobody interrupted. Nobody moved. The courtroom became completely still. The judge summarized the case. The marriage. The financial history. The ownership structures. The evidence. The witness testimony. Everything. Then he paused. A long pause. The kind that makes people hold their breath. And then he said something I'll never forget. Courts rely heavily on facts. Simple. Direct. Obvious. Yet something about the way he said it made the room feel smaller. He continued. Not assumptions. Silence. Not personal narratives. More silence. Facts. I glanced toward Derek. His eyes remained fixed on the table. The judge continued. And with every sentence, the truth became harder to escape. He discussed the ownership documents, the signed agreements, the legal acknowledgments, the financial structures, the evidence confirming Angela's interests in various assets. Then came the observation, the one nobody expected, the one that left the room completely silent. The judge removed his glasses, looked directly toward Derek, and said, Mr. Williams spent considerable effort attempting to convince others of what he owned. Silence. The judge folded his hands. But ownership is determined by law. The words landed like concrete. Heavy. Final. Impossible to argue with. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The judge continued. The documentary evidence in this case speaks far more clearly than confidence ever could. I heard someone behind me shift in their chair. That was it. The only sound. Because everybody understood exactly what he was saying. Without saying it directly, the judge wasn't talking about money anymore. He was talking about arrogance, about perception, about reality, about the danger of confusing one for the other. Then came another statement, even sharper. Success does not exempt anyone from accountability. I felt a chill run through me, not because the words were dramatic, because they were true, painfully true. The courtroom remained silent. The judge outlined his findings: asset distributions, financial determinations, ownership interests, legal conclusions, one after another, methodical, precise, irrefutable. Every assumption Derek had built his strategy around was dismantled, not emotionally, legally. And that distinction mattered, because feelings can be debated, documents cannot. Then something happened I'll never forget. Not because it was loud, because it was human. For the first time during the entire proceeding, Derek looked up, actually looked up, and our eyes met, just for a second, 1 second, but it felt longer. And in that moment I saw something I hadn't seen in years. Not arrogance, not contempt, not superiority, regret, raw regret. The problem was, regret arrived too late, years too late, after the insults, after the humiliation, after the manipulation, after the betrayal, after the damage. Some doors close quietly,